Hello, my good people. Welcome back to another podcast today. And today I want us to talk about an article about a former BBC journalist, Laura Trevelyan, who says that she hopes King Charles can apologize for the Windsor's part in slavery. In recent years, several wealthy white people, mostly British, have begun to unravel the sordid and immoral ways in which their families made their money. More often than not, all of these old families made their fortunes through the transatlantic slave trade. The former BBC journalist Laura Trevelyan's family is one of those people. She was an on-camera BBC reporter for 30 years, and she had a moment in 2020 covering the George Floyd/Black Lives Matter protests in the US. She suddenly saw the links between her family's history and the present day. She did some investigative work on her own family and ended up quitting her BBC job. Now, she works full-time on Caribbean restorative justice and the legal cause of seeking community reparations. The article reads, and I quote, "For 30 years, former BBC journalist and news anchor Laura Trevelyan traveled the world reporting on some of the biggest stories of our time. While covering the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd in the year 2020, Trevelyan had an epiphany. It was time for her to confront her family's role in a horrific era in history, the slave trade. Trevelyan's aristocratic ancestors owned more than 1,000 slaves in the Caribbean island of Grenada in the 18th and 19th centuries. Here is what Laura says, and I quote, "There were protests every single night after George Floyd's murder, and it's the lead story on the program that I'm not just as a journalist professionally, but also thinking personally. I was asking, if the legacy of slavery in America is police brutality towards black men, then what's the situation in Grenada?" says Trevelyan. After Britain abolished the slave trade in the year 1807, though slavery itself didn't end until the year 1833, slave owners negotiated compensation for the loss of property. In 1834, the Trevelyans received the equivalent of what would be $3.5 million today. Since discovering her family's past, Trevelyan has quit her prestigious job at the BBC and joined the movement of getting reparatory justice for the Caribbean. That ultimately led to her apologizing publicly at an event in front of Grenada's Prime Minister and paying $127,000 in reparations, which will be used to help fund educational programs in the country. Now, the former BBC journalist Laura Trevelyan, who quit her job to join the Caribbean's fight for reparatory justice, wants King Charles to apologize for the royal family's historic involvement in the slave trade. Trevelyan spearheads a group of British families who want to make reparations for their ancestors' participation in the transatlantic slave trade. In February 2023, Trevelyan gave $127,000 of her pension savings to the government in Grenada, which will be used to help fund education initiatives. After she learned her family once owned 1,000 slaves in the Caribbean nation. and she would like Charles, who has supported an investigation into the royal family's ties to slavery, to follow suit. And this is what she says, and I quote, "I would hope very much that in the coming years he can apologize for the royal family's historic links to slavery and make a meaningful financial gesture that will be seen as reparative," Trevelyan tells People. But what figure is, I have no idea. Honestly, I don't like having a negative mind, but from what I've seen, if King Charles could not apologize for what he did to his son Prince Harry and his daughter-in-law Duchess Meghan and his grandkids Archie and Lilibet for the pain he caused this young family to go through, how can we expect him to apologize for his family's involvement in slavery? I just don't think this is going to happen. Charles refuses to apologize for the Crown's involvement in the transatlantic slave trade because he doesn't want to give up one penny of the billions he's inherited, not to mention all the jewels, art and treasure the Crown has stolen for centuries. Charles is an egocentric and a very racist man. And that to me is enough reason for him not to apologize to anyone, especially black people. We know he was in Kenya just the other week and he did nothing or said anything that looked like apologizing for the colonialism or the life lost by Kenyan heroes fighting for freedom. He is a very selfish man and lacks empathy to people. I appreciate Trevelyan for such a kind gesture and the work she is doing. We are all one and the same before God, whether black or white. Race should not define us. If our great-great-grandfathers made mistakes, we should learn and try to change the situation, but not to be worse than them. Charles will never learn to respect other people and try to be concerned about anyone. Someone who can sacrifice some members of his family for his own benefit. Huh, you should fear that man. He is very dangerous. And this is the end of our podcast today, guys. Thank you so much for your precious time. And don't forget to leave a comment down below. See you in the next podcast.